Housing is the most affordable it's ever been, said literally no one ever. Between sky high rents, private equity, and bidding wars, finding somewhere safe to live feels harder than ever. And when it comes to that pressure, it's not just the financial pressure, it's also deeply emotional. And I should know because I'm Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, Michigan's first financial therapist. And today I'm talking to you all about housing, why it's become so expensive, what emotions come up, and what you can actually do about it. Whether you rent, whether you own, or whether you're kind of somewhere in the middle, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Look, housing is not just about the physical structure, it's about identity, it's about safety, and it's about belonging and your right to thrive. Let's start right at the beginning. Why is housing so expensive? Well, I'm coming to you from the United States, and the short answer is we simply haven't built enough homes. This is supply and demand 101. But the long answer is that there are policy decisions, red tape, and local resistance that have blocked progress for different types of housing for literally decades. Let's turn to some groups who are housing advocates. Groups like Neighbors for More Neighbors. I'm a member of the Ann Arbor chapter, and YIMBY Democrats have shown here is what is happening that's making it so freaking hard to find a safe place that is affordable to live. Restrictive zoning laws, such as things like banning anything that is not a single-family home, prevents more diverse housing types from being built. The permitting and approval processes drag out, and this dragged out or increased timeline makes things more expensive. When we do things like prioritize cars over people with mandatory parking minimums, it takes up space that could be used to build housing. Things like neighborhood character or charm are things that are thrown out there to really mask, quite frankly, exclusionary tactics and mask attitudes of like, you don't belong here, or this type of housing, or the people who live in this type of building don't belong here. And that type of behavior also delays construction, and it makes it hard for developers or people who want to build onto their home with something like an accessory dwelling unit. It makes them hard to actually get things done because those folks tend to be very vocal, have a lot of time, and it's hard to just like put up that fight. The other thing is like, it's just literally more expensive. As I mentioned earlier, inflation is impacting everything, and that includes the rising costs of material and the labor, right? It is expensive to actually build homes, and there are fewer people who are available to take on that type of work. That means not only are single-family homes more expensive, but things like apartments, duplexes, triplexes, and accessory dwelling units are often delayed, not started, and that means that the people who most need them are often pushed out and pushed away from where a lot of things are happening. So I mentioned earlier that this isn't just financial, it is emotional. Because when we go back to Psychology 101 and remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's a pyramid that shows what are the things that you need. Housing is at the bottom. It is a foundation. This isn't something frivolous. This isn't something that's nice to have. It is a literal need. And it's also something we call a social determinant of health. That is public health speak for something that is a non-medical factor that actually impacts our health. So when housing becomes more expensive and harder to find, it will inevitably mean that you are going to feel some feelings as you try and navigate it all. So if you've ever felt stressed because you're worried that you won't be able to afford a home, if you've felt embarrassed that you're quote unquote renting too long, if you've ever worried that your rent will go up despite your income staying the same, welcome. Those are the emotions, and that is the emotional side of this particular line item in everyone's budget, which is housing. Housing is deeply emotional. It is absolutely tied to feelings of safety, autonomy, belonging, family, legacy, and like just at the basics, it's like inherent dignity. And here at Mind Money Balance, it's okay to name it. It's okay to say, hey, I felt those things, and to unpack it instead of shame yourselves. We are so taught this idea that buying a home is this goalpost that every single person will achieve if they quote unquote have success. But for so many of us, that goal is either out of reach or like maybe you're just like, I don't want to buy a house, and that is totally fine. So let's talk about like the out of reach piece. It is literally so much harder to buy a house right now, even if you have like money on paper and in the bank. The cost of housing has gone up so much. Somebody that I follow in the personal finance space was really transparent and shared like, look, I've got a good net worth, I have a good job, but there's no way I'll be able to afford a house unless I have a trust fund or radically change my lifestyle and literally move somewhere else, which then like that becomes a whole other thing because then you're losing community, you're losing connections, you're losing probably jobs, things like that. Like it just isn't an option. And when I hear people say things like, oh, well, just move, it is the most like privileged thing that I have heard. And I mean that in a very derogatory way. I was once on a panel of financial experts talking about the cost of living, specifically in New York City. And somebody on the panel said, like, look, if you can't afford to live here, just move out of the city. And then my mind like exploded a little bit, and I had to do some deep breathing really quickly so I could maintain my professionalism. But I said a version of that isn't possible. It costs money to move, to pack up all of your things, to find somewhere else to live, to get from point A to point B is not $0. It is not just like a line item thing that we can easily change. So this idea of like just move somewhere else isn't an option for most people. And I want to remind you that the housing crisis is across not just the country, though I'm centering the United States since that's where I'm from, and most folks who watch this or listen to this, that's where they're from, but it's happening across the globe. Okay. It's also a myth that owning a home is the best way or the only way to build wealth. That's a completely other sidebar for another day. But if you've internalized that myth, I want you to remember that it is exactly that four-letter word, a myth. So that's even if you want to buy, why it might be a challenge. And let's talk about the renting piece if you're feeling some type of way about it. Like if you have shamed yourself because you think you should be further along or you've judged other people for renting, just remember that there are so many other factors to consider. So many people don't want to buy a house either. So you are fully allowed to opt out. And there could be a million different reasons for this. It could be that you don't want to be tied down. You're not interested in the emotional, financial, and physical labor involved in maintaining a house. It could be that you don't want to be tied to a loan that lasts 15, 20, 30 years. There are so many different reasons why buying a house should not be on every single person's financial goal list. Hopefully, I've helped to normalize why it's hard right now to find housing. So what can we do about it? You do not have to be a politician, an urban planner, or a policy wonk to be able to take action around advocating for better housing options. Whether you own a house or you rent, you can absolutely be a part of the change, not just for yourself, but for others, your friends, your nieces and nephews, your future generations. So let me give you a few different ideas of ways that you can enact change. And as always, take what works for you and leave what doesn't. First, just learn about pro-housing movements. I mentioned earlier organizations like Neighbors for More Neighbors and YIMBY Democrats are advocating for things like inclusive zoning, having housing built near transit, and including affordable options for all income levels by advocating for diverse types of housing. So often in the US, we have centered single-family homes as like the gold standard for housing, but there are so many other ways that we can get creative around what types of housing we can build. And if you don't know what acronym I'm saying, or you're like, what the heck is that word YIMBY? YIMBY is actually an acronym, and it stands for Yes in My Backyard, which is a movement of people who are pro-housing, right? They want to build more housing, they want to have more neighbors, and they also want to create more accessibility. These are groups that believe that when we build things like duplexes, triplexes, and apartment buildings in neighborhoods, not just like luxury penthouses or single-family homes, it helps to benefit the community. Housing should absolutely reflect community needs, not just like investor profit. They believe, and when I say they, I should include myself in this too, that a healthy city is one that welcomes people, doesn't exclude people. And maybe you're listening to this and you're like, well, my housing is secure. I bought a house 15 years ago and my mortgage is steady. Congrats, good for you. And I would say that it's also probably an issue for you or something that you should consider caring about if you care about things like the environment or community health or social support nets, which I will get into next. 2 is reflect on what makes a neighborhood strong. My undergrad degree was in sociology, so when a friend recommended this book about the sociological lens of housing, it was like this beautiful Venn diagram of things that just make my heart sing. So in this book called Palaces for the People, sociologist Eric Kleinenberg writes about social infrastructure, which are the places that bring people together. When you hear the word infrastructure, you might be thinking about things like bridges, tunnels, actual physical facilities and places. Social infrastructure is the ability to form and connect relationships with other people, and this often happens in places and spaces that allow people to create social connections. These are things like parks, playgrounds, libraries, any sort of like shared space where people can connect with one another and help communities thrive. I actually have talked about a version of this before, third spaces, which are places where we don't live, we don't work, but we can hang out with one another. And in this book, he argues, quote, when hard infrastructure fails, it's the softer social infrastructure that determines our fate. I actually listened to this audiobook and it's on Spotify, which is the same platform where you can find my podcast, Mind Money Balance. If you want to check it out, you can. And if you're already listening to a podcast version, just like type that in the search and you can check it out. Back to the type of neighborhood you want and the point of this particular bullet. It is not just the building or the structure. It is the connection. It is the bonds. When we are talking about supporting diverse, mixed income communities and hopefully mixed development communities too, we are investing in social resilience. When we see each other at parks or cafes, like this makes the type of social connection that makes you feel like you belong. And even if you are a self-proclaimed introvert, we know that having a healthy community impacts our mental health. That little stop and chat that you have with someone at the cafe, the little wave hello, how are you doing when you're walking your dog in a neighborhood park and chat with somebody, those things are so good for us. And that actually strengthens the entire community. And speaking of strengthening and connecting, you know that you can follow me here on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or you can make sure to follow me on Spotify. So that way you can continue to be looped into what's happening and get updates on the intersection of money and mental health. The third thing that you can do is to support policies that increase housing supply. If you are able to vote, definitely vote in favor of policies and politicians who are in favor of these things. You can also advocate in other types of ways. You can do postcard campaigns, you can do canvassing, you can put out a yard sign, especially when it comes to local issues. Interestingly, yard signs tend to be quite impactful, whereas like for big campaigns like a presidential election or gubernatorial, I can never say that word, a gubernatorial election, yard signs are a little less impactful, but especially when it comes to something hyper-local, put that little sign in your yard, in your vehicle or in your apartment window, or slap a sticker on your backpack or your laptop to signal to people, hey, I care about housing. So terms or things you're going to want to be cognizant of as you start strengthening these advocacy muscles are things like legalizing missing middle homes. Often this term of missing middle is used to signal things like duplexes, fourplexes, accessory dwelling units. Other things you're going to want to look for are politicians or policies who are about streamlining, building, reducing red tape, supporting affordable housing and affordable housing developments, and supporting renters' rights, such as protection from unjust evictions or sudden increases in rent. There are also ways that you can literally invest in community-based housing developments in your area. If you have the means, many housing developments have a way for you to do something like open up a CD at a particular bank or credit union, and that collateral can be used for that development project. You can also invest in terms of like volunteering or sweat equity, giving your time, your resources, or labor to a particular housing project. The reality is every city or township or community will look a little bit different, but wherever you are, you can ask yourself, How is this place, how is the place in which I exist physically becoming a more welcoming and affordable place to live? And then finally, the fourth thing I want you to think about is to stay informed and find community. I know it sounds like I've already said these things, but I just want to name for you the importance of getting connected and getting involved isn't just about like the politicking of it all. It's about not feeling isolated as you go through this. So this might look like finding a local tenant union, joining a housing advocacy group. I mentioned some earlier, attending a town hall or a city council meeting. I did that earlier this summer, and as a person who self-identifies as pretty politically active, I have to say this was the first time I spoke at a city council meeting, and I was definitely nervous. My voice definitely shaked, but it felt so good to use my time in the city that I live. I was allotted 3 minutes to name my support of and for expanding housing diversity. You can do that too. And if that feels like really big and scary, talk to your neighbors, talk to community members. As I mentioned, stickers, signage, language can help to open up space to have these types of conversations with your friends, with your family, with other community members, because the reality is it doesn't just impact you, it impacts all of us. And as soon as you start to realize that trying to find somewhere to live is hard for not just you, but for other people, and you start to acknowledge that this isn't a personal failing, this is a systemic issue, you can separate yourself from that judgment or the shame and start really building some strong community bonds and solidarity. When we center housing affordability, it creates a positive effect across our community. It is shown to increase money that is spent locally, which further enriches, no pun intended, the community that you live in. It decreases the risk of severe health problems. Remember, housing is a social determinant of health. It also creates not just physical infrastructure, but social infrastructure. These are the community bonds that we all need. Housing is absolutely emotional. It's also financial, of course, but it's bigger than just you. It is not that you can't find an apartment or you can't buy a house because you bought one too many lattes. If you cut out a year's worth of lattes, we're talking about like maybe $3,000, which is a big number. And at the same time, $3,000 is not going to be enough to use as a down payment on a house, especially right now. It should not be this hard. And there are things that we can do, whether individually, whether collectively, there are things that we can do to create the type of world that we want to live in. We can make things way better. So if you found this helpful or at least validating, please make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss out more on the emotional side of money. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What is one thing that you wish people understood about the cost of housing? Until next time, remember, it's okay to rent. It's okay to feel frustrated, and it's okay to ask for an improvement on the system because we all deserve a safe place to live and a peaceful place that is stable to land. Take good care. I'll see y'all next time.